want to talk a little bit about place. We are just releasing our 22 vintage of Ghielmetti Vineyard Cabernet Franc. Ghielmetti Vineyard, I've probably mentioned in these videos and certainly have written a lot about, especially in my first book. And my second book on Cab Franc, which will be out shortly, has more about Ghielmetti Vineyard. It's a vineyard that's located in the eastern foothills of the Livermore Valley. It is simultaneously stunning, the jewel of the Livermore Valley as far as quality goes, incredibly expressive from a terroir standpoint. We'll get back to that in a minute, what I think that means. And I think it is defining vineyard for Livermore and its topographical and weather-related phenomena, I should say, that make it a very special and unique place, rare place, if not exactly unique. Ghielmetti Vineyard was planted back in 1999. It's a 100-acre parcel, 64 acres are planted. It was planted by a company in Napa that did a really beautiful job of understanding soil breaks. It's a rectangular vineyard that runs down a hill from about 1,000 feet above sea level to 750 feet above sea level. A couple of arroyos that ribbon their way through the vineyard. So it does change the aspect of the site in certain places. Most of the blocks of vineyard, and there are 10 varieties planted there now. I think there were 11 originally when it was first planted, but there are 10 varieties there, all the Bordeaux varieties, with the exclusion of Semillon, but Sauvignon Blanc. 8 different clones of Cabernet Sauvignon, a block of Cabernet Franc in the lower half of the vineyard, planted in really fine-grained, loamy soil. There are a number of clay intrusions on the site. There's 5 or 6 different soil types that kind of ribbon their way through the vineyard. 12, 13 different blocks at this point in time, planted on a variety of rootstocks, a variety of clones, all of which is to say that it's a varied vineyard that I think was planted extremely well to begin with, and the replant that happened in 2017 was done very well too. We added a bunch of different clones of Cabernet Sauvignon. All of this is very reductive, however. The idea of terroir is important. The idea of terroir is written about by every wine writer that has any interest in really talking about wine and place and site and the like. It's a concept that is I think, variously understood by people. I think it's probably simpler in some ways than we make it out to be, and monumentally more complicated in other ways. But those complications are more emotional, I think, and more about authentic expressions of place than they are about the specifics of clone and rootstock and weather patterns and the like. The terroir of a place is the sum of all of the physical characteristics of it. Elevation, the amount of sunlight it gets on a day-to-day basis, the amount of rainfall it gets, what the soil types are made of, soil type, what's planted there, the aspect of vineyards to the sun from a directional standpoint, daytime and nighttime temperature differentials, the diurnal temperature range. All of those things are terroir aspects of the site. Terroir aspects can be outside of the place as well, in a sense. We have a little vineyard that we get Cabernet from called our home ranch, and it's planted up against a row of pepper and eucalyptus trees. It's planted downwind, so every year we get aromatic oil spread onto the grape skins in the first 5 or 6 rows of this site, which provides very different Cabernet from those 5 rows than it does from the rest of the vineyard. That's a terroir-driven aspect. It's part of the natural constituency of the vineyard. I would argue that the winemaker and the winemaker's intentions and the winemaker's authentic desire to be at the center of this web of authenticity is part of the terroir of the site also. But that's maybe a little bit more controversial than the characteristics, the natural characteristics part of the process. What's important to me about Ghielmetti Vineyard, though, is this. Because Livermore Valley is an east-west oriented vineyard, with its western edge only about 25 miles or so from San Francisco Bay. And because there are notches in the hillside right along the bay, and because there's a temperature differential, temperature engine vacuum, as it were, on the other side of the Altamont Pass, which is where Ghielmetti Vineyard is planted on the west side of the pass. And that hot air draws in the cold air every afternoon. The site's very windy, and that causes there to be fewer hours of photosynthetic activity than there were 10 years ago, a product of climate change, but also very different than a non-windy site would be. Ghielmetti Vineyard is the last vineyard really to break bud in the springtime and the last major vineyard in Livermore to be harvested. It's a site that is absolutely the, I think, fundamental definition of how weather and how climate change is affecting Livermore. That wind provides for very small increments of sugar accumulation during the growing season, which allows for some of these other ripening arcs like seed texture and skin texture, seed color, pH levels, TA levels to come into balance as sugar is coming into balance. Usually in warm areas in California, sugar runs rampant and runs way ahead of all the other ripening pieces of the vineyard, so that you are getting fruit that comes in at 26, 27, 28 bricks before the other pieces of ripening are achieved. That doesn't really happen at Ghielmetti Vineyard. Because of that effect, we're routinely harvesting grapes from Ghielmetti in mid-November, if not later. Often we will be punching down fruit, punching down must, fermenting musts in the winery before we put the turkey in for Thanksgiving into the oven, which makes this a site that is far less warm than people think, very different than Napa Valley. You can probably hear the wind sloughing off screen. That's a typical day here in Livermore, especially from August through November. More important than that, which I think is fundamental to this site and to Livermore Valley, is the emotional connection that my family has with this site. The Ghielmetti family became partners of mine in our wine business in the Stephen Kent Winery in 2005. They were looking to find somebody to manage their vineyard, thinking about starting a wine brand of their own. We had a conversation. They liked what we were doing. I liked the fact that I could have a stable fruit source. So we got together. They became partners of mine. And that partnership lasted from 2005 to 2014. We knew it wasn't going to be a permanent thing. We knew that they were going to be out of there at some point in time. They were not fundamentally farmers. When they left, and consequently, when the vineyard was sold, I began managing it for a new company. I was the manager of the vineyard for the family and for the Stephen Kent brand. And I was able to live on the site with my first wife, who had been diagnosed with brain cancer, glioblastoma multiforme, the year prior. So in 2015, we moved to Livermore. The horrifically horrible, terrible thing about GBM is that it is a disease that has a 0% long-term survival rate. And so when we got the diagnosis, we knew that my wife, June, was going to die from this, and that our responsibility, my responsibility to her and to my kids, was to try to create as much joy as possible as I was trying to climb out of my own horribly dark hole. That vineyard was a refuge for us as a family. We walked the vineyard every afternoon, hand in hand, first and haltingly later, and then in a wheelchair at the end. But it was always a place of immense beauty and immense quality, and a place that really did fill you. It's rare to be able to find a place like that. And after she died in 2016, died at the vineyard, we eventually had to move off. I eventually had to move off because the vineyard was sold to another wine family. We still get fruit from the site. I still think it's one of the great places in California to get Bordeaux varieties, especially Cab Franc. The Cab Franc that we get from Ghielmetti is pure. Its fruit is lean, its fruit is beautiful, its fruit is lithe and alive. And we concentrate our energies and concentrate our winemaking philosophy on trying to maintain as much of that as possible. That's the way Cabernet Franc should be, in my opinion. The wine should be lower in alcohol. The wine should be acid driven. They should speak to you. They should coil around you. They should point you to the dark places and help lift you out from those places so that you understand and remember difficult times, but ultimately life-giving times too, life-affirming times anyway. We make about 150 cases or so for one of our wine clubs. Some of this wine may find its way to various wine shelves around the country as well. If you're a Cabernet Franc lover, I think it's a wine worth tasting, a wine worth appreciating and drinking and taking into you. It's certainly a wine that will always be an immensely important part of the Mirassou family, especially the sixth and seventh generations of the family. And it's a wine I hope you get a chance to try. Thanks. Stephen Mirassou, wine saves lives. Drink something delicious.